Great, thanks. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our webinar Reading Across the Curriculum. We are the STAR project at SPAN, and I'm the project coordinator. Stephanie is the project director. We're also joined by the rest of our team, who are Brenda Figueroa, who is our bilingual parent group specialist, and she's also the director of Family to Family Health Information Center, Parent to Parent of New Jersey. Ellie Santiago, who is a parent group specialist for the START project, who covers many districts in the northern part of the state, and Ellen Woodcock, a parent group specialist and a literacy specialist for the New Jersey Tiered System of Supports Early Reading Project, and she covers the southern part of the state. Our guest presenter tonight is Dr. Jamie Zibulsky, who I will introduce properly in just a few minutes. The START project is a partnership between the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education, and SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. So first, we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping. During tonight's meeting, we are being joined by individuals who will assist with English and Spanish interpretation.
En esta noche, buenas noches a todos, estamos aquí con varias personas que van a ayudarlos con la facilitación de interpretación del lenguaje.
Along the bottom of your screen, you should see several icons, one of which is a globe labeled interpretation, but this is currently not turned on yet. It will come on. Just keep an eye out for it.
En la parte posterior de su pantalla están viendo varios iconos, entre ellos el icono del globo terráqueo. El mismo todavía no lo hemos encendido, pero pronto le indicaremos y ahí es donde pueden seleccionar el idioma que van a escoger.
So when I ask and the globe is on, please click on the globe icon.
Cuando ella lo indiquen, por favor, seleccionen el icono del globo terráqueo.
And then you will select your preferred language, English or Spanish.
Y entonces seleccionarán su idioma de preferencia, ya sea el inglés o el español.
Even if you do not require interpretation, you must select a language.
Aún si no requiere interpretación de lenguaje, debe seleccionar un idioma.
And when you do this, you will hear the meeting in the language you have chosen.
Y cuando proceda a hacer esto, va a escuchar la reunión en el lenguaje que ha seleccionado.
If you choose Spanish, you can also click Mute Original Audio, so you will not hear the English version at all.
Si selecciona español, también pueden escoger Mute Original Audio, o sea, silenciar el audio original para así no escuchar los otros idiomas en volumen más bajo.
Now, as shown on your screen, we're going to put the globe icon up, and you will select either English or Spanish.
Seleccionen ahora.
Okay, Stephanie's going to put the globe up. I hope.
Yes, it should be there.
Is it there?
I'm not seeing it. I'm sorry.
That's
It should be at the bottom. I enabled it. You should see at the bottom it says interpretation with a little globe.
On the possibly the right side of the bottom of the right side of your screen.
Wait, maybe if I click more.
And the
There
more option.
More, okay.
Yeah, Zoom made some changes, so some things have been updated. So hopefully you should see it.
Yeah, I don't see it, but I don't know. I'm where I am. Okay.
Brenda, can you hear me? You can hear me? Okay, Brenda.
Okay, Brenda is good. And Ellie is going to start the recording in the room to record it in the Spanish interpretation. Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. All right, so closed captioning is also available. So please locate the live transcript button on the control bar. Click on Show Subtitles to activate closed captioning. So let's talk a little bit about SPAN. SPAN's projects and programs for parents of children from birth to age 26 and for women of childbearing age extend to over 40 national, regional, and local programs funded by government agencies, foundations, and fee-for-service contracts. These programs cover education, health, and mental health, human services, child care, and child welfare. Our mission is to empower and support families and inform and involve professionals interested in the healthy development and education of children and youth. Our foremost commitment is to children and families with the greatest needs. This webinar is presented to you by the Start Engaging Parents of Students with Disabilities Project, which is a partnership between the New Jersey Department of Education Office of Special Education and SPAN Parent Advocacy Network. The Bookshelf is a START literacy initiative that is about supporting home engagement in literacy for families. So, our presenter this evening is Dr. Jamie Zibulsky, who is the author of Booksmart, How to Develop and Support Motivated Readers. Jamie's work with families is motivated by her belief that teaching parents to serve as their children's teachers and therapists is tremendously powerful. We're grateful to be able to work with Dr. Zibulsky as a literacy consultant on the START team. She embodies the SPAN philosophy of empowered parents, educated, engaged, effective. And with that, allow me to introduce Dr. Jamie Zibulsky. Hi, Jamie.
Thank you, Beth. Hello there. Hi, everybody. I am so happy to be spending time with everyone tonight and talking about reading across the curriculum. And as we are getting started, I will just give you the disclaimer that there's a lot of slides right in a row of you listening to me. And that's not typically the way we do things on these webinars, where we really tend to hear from everybody. And we also always leave room for questions and comments. So before I get started talking and talk too much, I wanted to note that we are really open to hearing those questions and comments from you. So feel free to use the chat box, to unmute yourself, to raise your hand. We've got a small group here tonight. So I might get rolling and keep talking, but I don't want that to dissuade folks from jumping in when it is appropriate. And so with that being said, our goal tonight is really to talk about the importance of reading in all subject areas in school. And so we wanted to start off by talking about the important reading skills that children need to develop in order to become successful readers. And I think that will help orient us to this conversation about reading across the curriculum, because we know that in order for kids to become good comprehenders of text, like you see in the box on the far right-hand side of this slide, that they need to not only be able to just read the words on the page, but they need to be able to really engage with them and make meaning of fictional text and informational text in any subject area. And so that means that they really need to have a lot of context for the information that they're reading, and they need to be able to make inferences and predictions and read between the lines about the material on the page, whether that means they're comprehending a narrative story or a math word problem. And so we can really see that reading success requires lots of other skills to be in place, and that it's a process that happens over time. So the big two skill areas that come across on this slide and in this simple view of reading are word recognition skills and then language comprehension skills. Word recognition skills, which are very important for reading success, really focus on skills like phonological awareness and the ability to decode the words on the page. And these are focal points of early elementary school literacy instruction. We're not going to spend a lot of time tonight talking about these word recognition and reading fluency skills, although they are obviously really important for being able to make meaning of the words right in front of you on the page. And if questions do come up about this, we can talk more about direct instruction in schools that supports reading fluency and decoding. But the language comprehension bucket is one that we really do want to spend more time on tonight, because it's one where family support can be so beneficial and is also really important when we talk about this idea of reading across the curriculum, because there's just not enough time during the school day to expose children to all of the background knowledge and vocabulary words they need to acquire over time to make sense of what they're reading. And particularly when we get to certain units of social studies instruction, we want to make sure that kids are building the academic vocabulary that they need in order to make sense of what they're being asked to do during the school day or at home. So we know that both of these areas are really important for kids in order to be successful in reading. And as we go through the next few slides, we'll talk more about this idea of language comprehension and the component skills that go into that. So if we move on to the next slide from here, we can see that when we talk about reading comprehension, we know that the term is a really broad one. So comprehension, or making meaning of text, is this complicated process, and it requires making many connections between words, ideas, and other books and other experiences. So we know that comprehension begins at the word level, because being able to recognize and decode a written word and pair that word with its meaning is essential to understanding the meaning of a longer selection of text. And that's one of the reasons that supporting vocabulary development is so important, as the richer a child's understanding of language, the easier it is for them to pair a newly decoded word with a familiar idea. We also know that there are so many other skills related to processing and retrieval of information from memory that play a role in reading comprehension, as well as reading fluency, like we were talking about a moment ago. And so all of these factors together can affect how easily a child can make sense of a sentence or a paragraph the first time they read it. We know that deep comprehension sometimes requires rereading information or taking additional time to make sense of what was read. And so, of course, this is important in ELA instruction specifically. It's also important when we start talking about reading across the curriculum and kids are really juggling a few different tasks at the same time, right? They're trying to use their reading comprehension skills to make sense of a passage about a historical event or to make sense of a math word problem. And because they might be focused on their end goal, which is answering this social studies question or answering this math question, they might rush through the comprehension process, but that is a really lengthy and important component of the other subject that they're being asked to engage in at that time. And so one of the reasons we wanted to talk about all these different levels of reading comprehension is that these memory, retrieval, processing speed skills can become especially important when a child's trying to read a longer passage, like an essay or a chapter in a book. So these comprehension skills like summarizing, predicting, and inferencing become very important when making meaning of a longer passage. And having the critical thinking skills necessary to understand why the passage was written, what the author's intention was in writing it, and the capacity to connect the text to other stories and personal experiences also becomes important to deeper levels of comprehension. So you can see why this is a really complex process and why it's important for us to talk about all of these levels of comprehension as we move on to thinking about how children use these different skills across the curriculum. And so thanks, Beth. So in order to promote reading comprehension, we know that kids really need the keys to unlock the meaning of text. Just like when they're decoding, knowing letter sounds is the key to identifying the letters on the page. We've already talked a little bit about the importance of vocabulary and critical thinking skills. And another very important key to passage comprehension is background knowledge. And so this is because the more we know about a topic, whether the topic is rainforests or any environment that might be the focus of a social studies chapter, or whether that topic is having a fight with a friend, which might be the focus of a fictional narrative, the easier we find it to make sense of the words on the page, the better we are able to comprehend the passage because we understand the context in which these words are being used. And so I want to just stick with this idea for a second and also take a moment to see if there are any questions or comments here. Because again, I think thinking about how background knowledge primes somebody to use their decoding skills and use their vocabulary is really important for understanding how much kids are juggling when they are reading. I do see there is a comment here. Oh, that's just it's just Stephanie's comment. Letting you guys know that you can ask questions. So let me actually pause here for questions.
Nothing?
I don't have a question. I'm sorry. I did want to comment. I know my 9-year-old is dyslexic, and when she is reading a passage, it's you're 100% right. When if it's something she knows about already, she has a much easier time getting through it. If it's something like when she's starting a new subject, you're trying to learn something about something new, doesn't have context of what she's reading about. If I were to give her just a blank paragraph that that she's never seen before, she would have a lot harder time. That's so accurate.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it's such a good representation of what many learners struggle with when they're approaching a new topic, right? And so this is especially true for a kiddo who might be dyslexic or might be struggling in some areas of reading. But the same thing is true, I think, for any of us when we're faced with, when I get a medical document in the mail or a legal document in the mail, and I need to all of a sudden use all of my conscious attention to decode unfamiliar words on the page. I don't get meaning the first time I read through that document, right? I begin to sound out the words. Then I say, like, okay, I need to go back through this again. Okay, now some of these words are more familiar to me. I get the gist. And then maybe on my third read through, everything starts to hang together. And so I really appreciate you sharing that story, Mackenzie, because I think it's a good example of, for any reader who is still working to build their decoding skills, how much of our conscious attention goes towards just reading the words on the page. And then if a lot of those words are already familiar to us, what a leg up that gives us for comprehension, right? But if they are unfamiliar words, if this is a new topic, it's going to take so many more times reading through it to become familiar and comfortable with the words, so we can move away and like unglue from just the words on the page and start to make meaning more broadly. So I think that this example of, and I hear somebody else unmuting, so let me just wait for other comments here before we go on to an example.
Okay, my name's Loretta, and I have a question. My daughter is basically like a disabled, and she's they call pre-primer reader. Is it like hopeless that she'll ever get it? Because the school that, she graduated, she's 21 now, they make it sound like, well, there's an impairment and she definitely has no ability. Is that really true, do you think?
I think the broadest answer I could give you is, I think when somebody says, any learner has no ability to do something, then they're framing the issue in the wrong way. And so I wouldn't want to give you too specific an answer, not knowing much about your daughter's needs and skills. But I would say anyone who's telling you that she can't ever do something, that there's no opportunity for change, is really not being growth oriented and is not thinking about the sensitive interventions that we can provide to people of any age to build reading skills. And so we are talking about a really complex array of skills here. And it sounds like decoding may historically be really difficult for your daughter. But if I were to jump back to the slide that we're talking about earlier, sort of like the simple view of reading. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping back on my screen and not on your screen. Thank you, Beth. If we were to jump back to this slide, we know that in order to comprehend information on the page, our ability to comprehend words on a page caps out based on what we can comprehend when we hear it orally, what already makes sense to us when we talk through it. And so if your daughter's literacy level for written words is lower than her oral language and vocabulary, then I think that gives you a good indicator already of what she's capable of talking about, right? The inferences she can make, the summaries she can provide when she's doing something that doesn't require just decoding on the page. And there's a lot of supports that we can talk about, and maybe some resources that we'll talk about later on in our presentation, that let us provide some scaffolding and assistance to readers who might be struggling with decoding. I'm finding myself want to give like a really lengthy answer here, I think, because it sounds like people have given you such discouraging perspectives before, Loretta.
Yes.
And so I think SPAN is a really great resource for you. And I think talking a little bit more individually about your case could be really helpful here. But I do think that part of the reason we wanted to show this whole overall simple view of reading is to say there's a lot of skills that learners need to and can build in order to become more successful readers. And so it certainly sounds like there's lots of opportunities for your daughter to become more successful with these skills. And there's a lot of supports out there to do just that.
Okay. So basically also don't give up. Never give up.
Yes.
That's
I
it,
think,
right?
yeah, I think everyone who, I don't want to speak for everyone who's here from SPAN, but I think my impression, and I've worked with SPAN for over 6 years now, has been that everyone at this organization got involved in this work because of the importance that, like, they know that families play in supporting their kids and helping schools recognize how to support learners who have higher levels of need or different needs than many of their peers in their classroom. And so not giving up and advocating for your child is so important.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
absolutely. So again, we can talk about that a little bit more later. I'm going to go back to what we were talking about just a moment ago of this idea that familiarity with a text makes it easier to comprehend. And so what we wanted to do next was give you an example of how difficult it can be for all of us, like Mackenzie was pointing out earlier for her daughter, to make sense of text when the meaning is not clear to us. And so we have a passage on this page, and some of you may have seen examples like this before, that I will read to you now. And it is a passage that I am qualified to decode, so I'll try and read it fluently for you. Australia failed to fully capitalize on the second wicket stand of 182 between Smith and Finch, as Michael Clarke's men were stunted by the off breaks of Ravichandran Ashwin and a curious collective failure against back-of-a-length bowling. So, as you can see, hopefully, I'm pretty well able to decode the words on this page fluently and read the passage to you in a way that sort of like approximates the way you would read something with good tone and pacing, etc. But even so, I really did not understand what I was just reading to you. And that's because I lack background knowledge of cricket, a sport which is typically not played in the United States. So if I knew what a second wicket stand or back of length bowling was in the same way that I know what a touchdown or a penalty kick was, the passage would seem much less confusing to me, right? If I knew who Smith and Finch were, like I know who Travis Kelce is, the passage would be a little bit easier to interpret. And so I think this example can help you see how much background knowledge supports reading comprehension and help us recognize how often kids are asked to make sense of books or stories, even when they might lack important background knowledge. And so I probably did there what we've seen some children do in school, which is I faked it pretty well, right? Because I have proficiency reading other passages, I was able to make it sound like I knew what I was talking about as I read through that passage. But I really would not have been able to pass a test if somebody had asked me what I had read or answer multiple choice questions. And if the passage got much longer, you probably would have seen my fluency drop as well, because I was able to get ahead of second wicket stand based on my knowledge of other terms like that. But if I had to read 4 pages, you would probably hear me start to become a little bit more disfluent. And so that's what our children are going through when they're being asked to read, particularly when we start talking about across the curriculum in science or social studies. And these words are new to them, in addition to being difficult for them to decode. So let's talk a little bit more then about what we can do to support learners in this way. As I think we've already noticed from our conversation and from Mackenzie's comment, we know that the more we know about a topic, the easier it becomes to understand the written passage in a precise and deep way. And it's also really important for us to acknowledge that simply teaching comprehension strategies like activating background knowledge or summarizing doesn't always make it possible or easy for learners to apply these strategies to new topics. So these strategies require executive functioning and critical thinking skills that might take a long time to develop. And parents and teachers may need to support younger readers or struggling readers in using these strategies whenever they approach new passages. So I'm going to just pause to take a sip of water so you don't hear me cough too much. So I think Mackenzie's example was really relevant here as well. And this comes up for me. I have a fifth grader. And when he is reading something that's familiar to him, and then he's asked to share out information about that topic, to write a short answer in response, he will have difficulty applying his comprehension strategies to a new passage because he'll be consumed with reading the passage. And like Mackenzie said earlier, especially if it's unfamiliar to him, we're really asking kids to do a lot all at one time. If we ask them to read 3 pages of information, keep track of it, and then tell us something about it, right? To be writing afterwards, we will often talk about that like it's one activity, when in fact this is really many activities built into one. And so we might require additional prompting or support in order for kids to be able to use these comprehension strategies, especially when they begin reading in these other subject areas in school and are using their English language skills to also think about science or social studies or math. And so as we go through each of these topics, and we can move on to the next slide again here, Beth, if that's okay. We really want to think about the vocabulary words and the background knowledge that's going to help scaffold learners in each of these areas. We know that each of these subject areas is one where children deepen their knowledge over time as they explore key content in deeper ways each school year. And so their comprehension of a topic like rainforests or deserts or the natural environment that we're talking about in science class might become more and more sophisticated over time. They have increasing touch points each year as they go through school so that their schema and background knowledge develop further, making it simpler for them to approach that topic over time. So we have some examples that we wanted to share with you of how you can help your child build this deeper background knowledge by increasing exposure to a particular topic. So for example, if your child was learning about one of these natural environments, rainforests, deserts, oceans, you could find podcasts, books, TV shows, local trips that you could take together to learn more about that particular environment. And each time you talk about this topic with your child or visit a place or watch a show together, their background knowledge becomes deeper because they've had more exposure to a word that was previously unfamiliar to them. And they've got more other words or ideas they can connect it with. And so for those reasons, it becomes much easier, as Mackenzie was saying earlier, when you see a passage, if there are all of these touch points that help your child decode a word that might be a little bit unfamiliar to them or connect that word to another idea, it's going to reduce the conscious attention that they spend figuring out what's going on at the passage level itself and be able to interpret it a little bit more. So I wanted to go on to show you an example of a math word problem that might come up for a child. And we can really think about, again, how much academic vocabulary goes into an example like this or a problem like this. And I think this is especially useful for us to spend some time talking about because we know that math word problems can be very challenging for learners and especially for less sophisticated readers. So you can see in the example in yellow here. So John went to the store, he bought a box of 35 pencils. He wants to make sure that he has enough pencils in his house to use on each day of the week. So he decides to sort them evenly into containers that he will use on different days. How many pencils will he put into each container? Now, if you think about this question from the perspective of a learner who might be struggling to decode or keep a lot of information in memory at the same time, this can feel really exhausting, right? This is a very different problem than 35 divided by 7. And so a child might be capable of solving that math problem, but finding the information in this passage that they need to set up the equation 35 divided by 7 is going to stymie them. Just the amount of text on a page can sometimes be really daunting for a child, right? So even here, where it's taken 3 sentences and the middle one is a really long sentence, can be enough to have a child say, like, I'm not trying this. Or even when they are trying it, to lose track of, now that I got to the end here and I understand that we're setting up a division problem, I forgot how many pencils we had at the beginning. I need to go back up to sentence 1 and find out that it's 35 all over again. You can see in the example in orange, you could make this question even a little bit more complicated, right? So you could say, okay, he's going to sort them evenly into pencil cases that he will use on each of the school days in a typical week. And so if we go to the next slide, and we can toggle back and forth between these two if we want to, we can see that there's a lot of sophisticated math vocabulary in these problems. And so saying we're going to sort something evenly into containers is a synonym for dividing. And if a child has that academic vocabulary, if they hear sorting, right, we're splitting them up, we're putting them in different places for each kid, they can say, like, oh, I know this is a division problem. We know that when we talk about days of the week or months in the year or anything that has an underlying numeric value, that kids need background knowledge in order to translate that to 7 days of the week. And so there are so many pieces of information that go into these problems and so many assumptions we make about what kids can do all at one time and the vocabulary that they have. And so it becomes really important for us to break down problems like these into each of their component steps, and also to give kids a glossary or definitions the same way we would in other subject areas, so that they can begin to apply these strategies across problems, right? So to say, when you see the word sorting them, think, oh, are we talking about dividing here? We say taking away, are we talking about subtracting? Are there things we can do in each problem so that this makes sense to us across a problem set? So if we move on from here, we know that there are so many different things that you can do at home in order to help kids be more successful with this comprehension piece. We know that the more exposure that children have to any of these words or any of these ideas, the more likely they are to feel confident when they face these words on the page. And so any of the things that you can do to infuse academic vocabulary into your everyday life is going to be helpful, not just for kids who are decoding independently, but for learners who might be free readers based on age or stage of development. And so to Loretta's question earlier about her daughter, all of the strategies listed on this slide are ones that build language comprehension, right? And language comprehension is a skill that you can build without a book in front of you. So you don't need to be reading together to be talking about the ideas in a story, in a television show that you saw at the museum. And so really thinking together about how you can build background knowledge and build vocabulary is beneficial, because it's sort of money in the bank for when your child does become successful in decoding. And it's something that you can be doing years before your child is ready to be decoding independently. So finally, we want to leave more space and time for questions that folks have. We can revisit any of these slides that we went through that you'd like to talk through a little bit more thoroughly. But why don't we leave time for other people's questions or comments here? And please let us know too if there's something that you were hoping to hear about tonight that we haven't talked about yet.
I just I just think it's funny that, not funny, coincidental, maybe is the right word. Even just the example you used, my daughter, I was sitting down with her to do word problems last night, and she's always struggled with math, not she's good at math. Her issue is reading, and once I explained to her that she was able to do all that, but we made a glossary because she would get caught up in trying to read the paragraph and not know what function she was supposed to be doing. So, less than means subtraction. We did just that, and it's helped quite a bit.
That's so great to hear. And I think that's such a useful example for other folks to hear on this call too, because it's really a testament to how many steps go into this process when we are reading across the curriculum. So being able to make that glossary, it really is why we had that clip art of like, these are the keys to unlocking comprehension, because you're giving her a tool to demystify those word problems that previously might have felt so complicated or she might have been getting lost in. And I think it's also a testament to how much time it takes as a parent or an educator then to help a kid through that process.
Absolutely. She actually said she feels much more comfortable doing them because now that we've gone over those words, she knows, even if she doesn't understand the rest of the passage, as soon as she picks out those words, she knows what kind of math she's supposed to be doing. And then she can kind of calm down a little bit and focus on, like, putting the numbers in and figuring the rest out.
That is really such a great example. And we could probably find good examples like that in each of the subject areas that kids are going to approach each school year. So in reading specifically for ELA instruction, you will often hear teachers talk about trigger words like however or although, something that lets you know that there's a contrast coming up or a difference coming up. And so applying those types of sort of glossary words as kids get into historical texts or informational texts in science instruction is also so helpful, because it means even if they don't know every word on the page, they understand what the anchor is there. And so that example is a really, really useful one. I see there was another hand. Stephen had his hand up and went back down, but I was wondering if you had a question or comment as well.
I don't know about a particular comment or question. I don't know what category it falls in. I work in third grade, right after they're out of the phonics, and okay, let's be clear. They're supposed to be, according to curriculum, that they are out of phonics and phonemic awareness. And I'm noticing a lot of kids who have learned different ways of adapting their reading to a point where I'm noticing that they have mastered this art of memorizing words that look like vocabulary words that may come across in the passage, and it completely destroys their comprehension as they're going through, because it's almost like their comprehension and their ability to memorize and understand things on a passage is really hindering their ability to take in new information and decode words, because they're relying so much on context and or their memorization skills to overcome unfamiliarity. And when I'm leaving them to, I can clearly pull on one string at a time, because then I end up with things where they teach themselves almost like rules to the English language that don't exist, such as the vowel teams, instead of like the word said, for example, which is typically taught as a sight word. But because of that AI, some of them have taught themselves that that's the sound it makes, going through every other word as they're going in, and I have to unravel and take it back notches. And have you noticed with the shift in the science of reading, I guess, from how the reading was before, or just this group of kids because of how they were impacted by the COVID epidemic? Or what are you noticing? Are these things just common, or is it just something that I'm noticing within the school? I will say I have a lot of kids this year in particular who have, I have a couple kids with dyslexia. I have one with a speech thing that kind of affects what sounds he is hearing and how he is going through things. So a lot of them is, but it's starting to build to a point where I'm seeing it now in kids that are thought to be typical, which I don't think there's such thing as typical, but yeah.
No, I think that's such a great observation. And it's so important for folks to talk about this, especially in the third, fourth grade range, because what Stephen is articulating is really that these are kids who are thought to be successful decoders already, right? So they've come up to third grade and we think that they can focus on comprehension both in ELA instruction and as they start to approach other subject areas in school. But in fact, many of them are still making errors with reading fluency that are going to impact their capacity to make meaning of the passages that they read. And so this is, I think many of us would see it as like, this is an emergency because a third grader who is still making those types of errors, and, Stephen had said, like you said, they're making this error consistently, right? So they're applying a misunderstanding of how to pronounce or read a word and then generalizing it across that word type or across a passage. And so the error is getting reinforced for them over time. And what's going to happen is that kiddo who's making an error like that in their third grade text is then going to go to fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. Reading material gets more and more complicated and more dense. And so the challenge that it's going to lead to in reading comprehension is just going to become more vast over time. And so I know you know that already, Stephen. I was sort of laying that out for everybody on the call to think about this challenge now. And in answer to your question about how much I've seen that and why I think that might be, it does make me the first question I would have. I feel like this is a good way to get yourself hooked on other SPAN webinars, because the first thing that makes me wonder is what the K-2 literacy instruction looks like in the school system where you're working, and if there is as explicit and systematic and focus on phonics as there should be in a curriculum in order to address disfluencies, right? Because you might be getting a really big job handed to you as a third grade teacher who then needs to remediate some early reading challenges that come up through instruction that should be being addressed in the earlier grades. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes, it does. It's very interesting because there are often times where they can really get in, if they have the background knowledge, like you said, they can really dissect, and it helps them. Like, even when, but there's other times where I'm like, this is being reinforced, and I can't sit with you all the time. And when you're reading on your own, you're reinforcing it yourself. And I don't know how your parents are sitting over your shoulder correcting the words that as you approach them. And yeah, I want to make sure, I want to see if there's a better way to handle it other than like I described it before, just pulling at individual strings to fix them, like when I catch them.
Right. And I think, yeah,
without shooting myself in the foot curriculum wise, because now I'm going back and I'm basically teaching second grade as well as third grade at the same time.
And I do think I was, in some ways was joking, some ways was not, to say like there's other great webinars on this topic, because I think it sounds like you are identifying an issue that should be being screened and progress monitored in second grade. And so having conversations at your school about what the second grade curriculum looks like in terms of its rigor, and then how folks are making sure that the majority of students are responding to the curriculum effectively is what keeps you from doing like an over level of differentiation and remediation. So I think it sounds like you are really identifying something important that is going on at a systems level in your district. And then it's figuring out the right way to bring that up to other folks to, make other change agents be involved there rather than you specifically. I want to move on only because of the amount of time that we
There
have.
is
I could
someone
talk
with a question. Can we just get to the one more question?
that's
All right.
that's why I went into no. I could Courtney's hand up also, and I wanted to make sure we had time to hear from her.
We'll hear from Courtney and then we'll just do a quick wrap up at the end with Beth of the resources.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I didn't really have so much of a question, but just a comment, fun little tip for those of you that know parents of children that are homeschooling. I have two young nieces, and they're actually both homeschooled. So when it came to learning phonetic pronunciations and stuff like that, we took things that were within their special interests. Like my youngest niece has a love of plants and gardening, so I grew a garden outside, and I would teach her the spelling and the way to say the plant names. So she learned how to spell potato by looking at my little stake sign saying potato, and we'd sound it out with all of the compounds and everything like that. And now she'll whip out a cookbook and say, we need 3 potatoes and we need 4 of this. And I'm like, yay, awesome. So
I
there's
love that.
fun little ways that you can even, like, just aside from the school and the reinforcing at the school, but you can find other ways to teach them fun ways to learn things, especially if they are homeschooled. So like, but my youngest niece, she could not read a single word in a book for the longest time. And we sat down and just showed her fun little things in books and fun little words in her activities. And we're like, okay, that's how you spell blue and that's how you spell green. So it's just a fun little, like, just so you know, knowledge thing that you can also do with kids, especially if they're homeschooled.
Thank you, Courtney.
Jamie, was there anything you wanted to add to that, Jamie?
No, let's let Beth talk about the resources from here, and then if we have any other questions or time, we can talk more.
Okay.
Sounds good. So we do have a few resources. We have a literacy, we have a grant through the World Reader BookSmart app, and if you all of these resources are going to be in the resource folder. So we have a reflection form that will have you that will drop a link in the chat for, and then once you fill it out, you'll automatically get access to the folder, which we will put the recording of this presentation in the folder, and then we'll have these resources along with a list of other things that you can check out both in English and Spanish. So this is the BookSmart app. It is an app that is on your phone, and it has books in English and Spanish, and it has activities for each book. So it's when you sign up for it, you just put in the library code SPAN, S-P-A-N, and it's a great way to be able to have books anywhere, anytime access to. So that's one. And then we also have a texting program, which every week we send out a text, and it's a tip on reading comprehension, vocabulary fluency, phonics, phonemic awareness. It might be something about an event we're doing, maybe a especially good resource that we found. So that's something that you can sign up for. That too is in the folder. And then I wanted to mention we've been working on creating activity pages called Build the Skill that focus on rhyme time, which focuses on more like phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. And the other one is I Say, You Say, which builds vocabulary, which ties in nicely with what we were talking about today. So these pages also are in the folder. And the last bit is a couple of us also work on the New Jersey Tiered System of Supports for Early Reading project here at SPAN. And so we have a webinar coming up about what every parent needs to know about early reading part 2. That's in November 20th. We'll have Deborah Lynham join us and talk about what is effective, what should effective reading instruction look like in your child's classroom. This is part 2. We have a part 1, which there's a link on the flyer that can take you to the YouTube recording of the part 1, which we did back in July. And we also have parent-teacher conferences are coming up, and we have a tip sheet on what to do before, during, and after as well. So If anybody has any other questions, we also may just drop the reflection form links in the
I
chat.
did. So if
you
you click
can.
that link, it will take you to the
Okay.
evaluation. When you complete
Thank you.
the evaluation, you're going to then see a message that pops up that says thank you. And then there will be a link there to the folder. So you should see that. If for whatever reason you don't, just shoot me an email. And I can send, but this is the link to I'll put it in here again, the link to the evaluation.
Thank you all again for coming, and thank you, Jamie, as always, for sharing all this good information with us. We will be having more webinars. We have what I mentioned, the NJTS SER next month, but we'll be having other things, including a roundtable for our parent groups and parent leadership across the state, and we'll be talking a lot about community resources and things like that. So if that's interesting to you, please join us. That flyer also is in the resource folder.
Mhm.
And Sabrina just asked if the folder will be sent to folks' emails.
So once you fill out the reflection, you'll get a link to the folder. So that'll be automatic.